This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Should the Browns go after Davante Adams? He put out his trade request for the Raiders earlier this week. The Raiders have said they're open to trading Davante Adams. They've even leaked to the press that the price would probably include a second-round pick. And there are a lot of people wondering, hey, is this the pick-me-up the Browns offense could use? Is going after Davante Adams something the Browns could do? So let's discuss it. First question, when you look at a Davante Adams trade for the Cleveland Browns, is why would the Browns do it? And the argument for why the Browns could do it is they're having struggles with their number one wide receiver, Amari Cooper. While Jerry Jeudy has played well, Jerry Jeudy is not necessarily a number one wide receiver. And the Browns are in a situation where they have to get as much out the quarterback position as possible, and maybe getting a true number one like Davante Adams would be something that would be worthwhile for the Cleveland Browns, especially considering that Davante Adams is under contract for a couple of more years, and the Browns' number one wide receiver is set to leave the team after this year. So you would knock two birds out with one stone, essentially, right? You have your replacement for Amari Cooper, you upgrade the wide receiver core, and you also get a true number one wide receiver in the building. So that's the argument for the Browns doing it. Now, how much would it cost? Again, they've put out that they at least want a second-round pick and some assets. The question for the Browns is, would you be able to include Amari Cooper in a trade with Davante Adams included? I would highly doubt that the Raiders would be interested in Amari Cooper being included in it still. Not because Amari Cooper is a horrible player or anything, but because Amari Cooper makes absolutely no sense for the Las Vegas Raiders time frame, right? The Raiders are not close to being in win now mode. Like, they're definitely a team that would be content with a surprise playoff appearance. They don't need to do that this year. There's no real pressure for them to do that. Their head coach is in the first year of his contract. So again, no real need there to have a big year or make a panic decision and trade for Amari Cooper or trade Davante Adams while taking back Amari Cooper. It just wouldn't make sense. If the Raiders want anything, they want draft assets and they want young players who are still under control on their rookie deal. The Browns don't have a ton of players they'd be willing to part ways with in that use case, right? They're not going to trade DeJuan Jones. They're not going to trade Martin Emerson. They're not going to move any of their young players because they haven't had first-round picks in the last 3 years. So they want to keep as many of their talented young players as possible. So I don't see them budging on that. And then when you talk about adding draft picks, I just don't think the Browns would be interested in adding a ton of draft picks to go after Davante Adams. So the price could be prohibitive for the Cleveland Browns. Also, there's the question of, could they afford it on a salary cap perspective? Now, they could make it work, right? It would be adding $5 to $10 million from what Amari Cooper has been making to the budget. You'll probably have to cut back one starter. You're talking about maybe Jack Conklin, maybe Wyatt Teller, and replacing them with a draft pick. But you can maneuver the cap around to where you can afford it. Again, you got to have a evaluation on how strongly you feel about Deshaun Watson as an organization. Like, do you feel like Deshaun Watson has played at a strong enough level to justify locking yourself in to not just him as the quarterback, but a core that's being built around him and Davante Adams when both players are going to be over 30 by the end of their contracts. That would be a huge concern to me. Like, a lot of the Davante Adams stuff would feel good in the short term, but I don't love the long term implications of trading for Davante Adams. And then there's the consideration of if this is even going to make the Browns better. Now, would Davante Adams, talent-wise, be a more talented wide receiver than any of the wide receivers on the Browns roster? No doubt. He would immediately be the best wide receiver. But if we're talking about this logistically, should the Browns, who are already having issues getting this offense up and running the way they want it to, add another moving piece to that issue that they have going on, right? Like, they have to add another moving piece to this wide receiver room. It's going to be another mouth to feed, so to say, in that wide receiver room. We have to factor in Davante Adams and where Davante Adams likes to get the ball. What kind of route concepts does Davante Adams like? This is not just a regular wide receiver you can put on practice for a couple of weeks and then just kind of put into what you're already doing. This is the quality of wide receiver that you kind of got to change everything that you do to integrate him in. And I don't know if we're at the point offensively where we're stable enough to be able to do that when we're going to have to do that same exact thing for Nick Chubb, for David Njoku. Like, it feels like that would be enough to kind of break whatever processes is going on to try to move the Browns offense in whatever direction they've been trying to go to. And it's not been great so far at the beginning of the season. So Davante Adams being added in there, it could work out, right? Adding Davante Adams could give the Browns offense the easy button that it desperately needs, because as much potential as this has to be the easy button for Deshaun Watson, I think there's an equal amount of potential for this to become an issue for Deshaun Watson, right? Because let's say you can't move Amari Cooper, which, again, I kind of already explained why it would be difficult to include Amari Cooper in a trade with the Las Vegas Raiders for Davante Adams. Maybe you can add a third team in there, but I always say this, once you're talking about adding a third team in a trade, you just ain't going to be able to make that trade the way you want to. Like, I don't think Amari Cooper is likely to be a part of this because it doesn't make sense for the Raiders to be interested in Amari Cooper. And also, something I'm going to mention in my Amari Cooper video I'm dropping later, if you trade Amari Cooper, you're going to lose about $15 million in cap space for 2025 versus if you just let him walk. And if you trade for Davante Adams, you're definitely going to need that $15 million cap space. So, like, if you get Davante Adams, you're likely going to have Amari Cooper on the roster still. So this is why I'm thinking about that. You already are integrating Amari Cooper into this new offense. You already are integrating Jerry Jeudy into this new offense. And now Davante Adams is getting integrated in that. And there's a good chance that instead of Watson getting an easy button, Watson has to worry about being diplomatic while playing the quarterback position, right? He doesn't want the targets to lean too heavily in one direction or the other. And then you have the same thing going on the sideline where you can't just play call, right? You got to be diplomatic about who's getting the targets because you got a lot of different people to feed in that wide receiver room. And when you're worried about being diplomatic with those things, when you're worried about being diplomatic as a play caller or as a quarterback, you're probably going to be worse at those things. So I don't know if it's automatically something that's going to improve the Browns, because logistically, it's just a little bit messy how the Browns have to integrate Davante Adams. Now, would it all be worth it if Davante Adams is playing at that offensive player of the year level? Sure. But is Davante Adams still that offensive player of the year caliber wide receiver? He's still a very good wide receiver, but I don't think he is at that point anymore where he's like a top 3 wide receiver in the NFL. So you could go through all this trouble to build the offense around Davante Adams. And what if you do all of that and Davante Adams is simply just not as good as he used to be? The Browns got to start worrying about getting younger this year, next year, and the year after. They really got to start worrying about getting younger. And I don't think trading for an older wide receiver one is really going to do them wonders in the future, because right now you got a lot of players, a lot of key players on this team looking north of 30, dead in the face. And if you're the Browns, you got to start building that next core. Got to start building that next young generation of players and sacrificing a second-round pick and potentially another young player to go get Davante Adams to get older, I think is a short-sighted decision. Unfortunately, in Cleveland, we have seen the downside of trading for a big wide receiver, right? Because when you get that big-time wide receiver, all we can usually think of before you make the trade and right after you make the trade is how it can work out. We don't ever really think enough before making a trade for a wide receiver about the logistics of it, right? Like, is this going to force your quarterback to be diplomatic about the targets, right? And is that a style of play that your quarterback can handle? Is that a layer of complexity added to that wide receiver situation that your quarterback can handle? Not every quarterback can. Some quarterbacks can handle just getting the ball to their main guy and dealing with that. Some quarterbacks can handle multiple different egos on the same team and balance them. Some quarterbacks can't. It's a tough thing to balance. It's part of why the Bills got rid of Stephon Diggs, because they got tired of balancing and being diplomatic about who's going to get the targets in the offense. They got tired of it. So they moved on from one of their most successful wide receivers. It's a difficult thing to do. And we're already struggling offensively because we're trying to add a bunch of new stuff to the offense, because we're trying to integrate a new wide receiver or new concepts to the wide receiving room. It doesn't make much sense to me to go out your way to add something else that you have to integrate unless you are 100% confident that that player can play at that NFL Offensive Player of the Year caliber that he once was at. I don't know if that's the case for Davante Adams. Now, maybe it's because he's been playing in Las Vegas, but it's been quiet on the Davante Adams front. I have no doubt that Davante Adams is still a good player, and wherever he lands, he's going to get north of 1,000 yards. That's not what I'm worried about. My question is, will Davante Adams at age 33, age 34, age 35, where he's set to make $33, $34, and $35 million for those years, still be that caliber of player? And then also you have to wonder, like, how much is wide receiver separation actually the problem for the Browns offense? I would argue you're getting some focus drops from your best player. That's giving you a lot of the issues with the offense. Also, not having David Njoku or the run threat of Nick Chubb is something that's also affecting offensive efficiency and will be solved over time. When you look at wide receiver separation, the Browns are actually doing pretty good at this separation thing, right? When you see the separation, it's at the bottom of the screen. The Browns are all the way on the right quadrant of this separation chart, which means that they're getting the separation. Guys are open. And when I watch the tape, it's not like the Browns are struggling to get wide receivers open. That's not been the problem. It's been fluctuating between wide receivers catching the ball consistently and the quarterback getting the ball there accurately, like on a game-per-game basis. That's been the issue, but separation and guys being open has really not been the problem. Maybe you can also factor in that the offensive line has been dealing with a ton of injuries, and that has made it a lot leakier than you would want it for the quarterback there. So you can add all those problems up, but Davante Adams does not play left tackle. Davante Adams plays wide receiver. And I don't think wide receiver is where the Browns have the most pressing need and where the Browns would benefit the most from signing a player. If the Browns were to trade for any player from any position group, I would argue it should be at defensive tackle, because the Browns defense not having a difference maker in the defensive tackle positions right now, I think it's causing massive problems in the run game. So if I were to advocate for the Browns to make a big trade for somebody, I would advocate for a defensive tackle. Like if DJ Reader said he wanted to trade, I would pound the table for the Browns to get that done because that would make 100% sense. But adding another wide receiver, I don't think is going to solve some of the Browns' biggest problems. Yes, it would make wide receiver better for this year. There is a question of like, what would it look like the 2 years that are left on that contract after this year, where it's going to be also the most expensive, and will it be worth what the asking price is for, which is a second round pick and potentially more assets for a team that really does need to start getting younger starting this offseason. So I wouldn't be in favor of it. I understand why it's an enticing idea, but I do think it ends up being something that has a lot of short-term returns, but not a lot of long-term returns. And we're not sure about where this team is at yet enough to feel good about trading for somebody exclusively for a short-term benefit. That's my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.